There are roads that people avoid at night, not because of potholes or dangerous turns, but because of something else, something that waits in the darkness. Truckers, taxi drivers, and late-night travelers whisper about a figure seen on lonely highways, a dry body, skin stretched thin over bone, hollow eyes that seem to stare straight into your soul. Some say it's just an illusion, a trick of the mind after too many hours behind the wheel. Others know the truth, because those who stop for it never make it to their destination. These are their stories. Story 1. The passenger on Route 66. Carlos had been driving trucks for over 15 years. He had seen just about everything. Drunken wanderers, animals darting across the road, even an occasional ghost story among fellow truckers. But nothing prepared him for what he saw on Route 66 one night. It was past 2 a.m., and the highway stretched endlessly ahead of him, illuminated only by the glow of his headlights. His eyes burned from exhaustion, and he made a mental note to pull over at the next rest stop. Then, a figure appeared on the side of the road. At first, he thought it was a hitchhiker, tall, thin, unmoving. But as he got closer, his stomach twisted. It wasn't just thin. It was withered, skin dry and cracked, stretched tightly over bones, as if all the moisture had been drained from its body. Its face was hollow, eyes sunken deep into their sockets. And yet, it smiled. Carlos's foot hovered over the brake pedal, but every instinct screamed at him to keep driving. Then, the truck engine sputtered. The radio crackled with static. The headlights flickered. And before he could react, the figure was no longer on the roadside. It was in front of the truck. Carlos yanked the wheel, barely avoiding the collision. The truck skidded, tires screeching against the asphalt. When he finally came to a stop, his heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst. He turned his head, breath shallow. The road behind him was empty. No body, no signs of impact. But then, a whisper right next to his ear. "You should have stopped." Carlos didn't think, didn't breathe. He slammed the truck into gear and tore down the highway, refusing to look in the mirrors. When he finally reached the next truck stop, he told an old-timer what he had seen. The man's face went pale. "You saw La Carcasa Seca," he muttered. "The dry body." Carlos barely slept that night, and to this day, every time he drives that stretch of road, his radio crackles at 2 a.m., and sometimes he hears the whisper again, "You should have stopped." Story 2. The thing in the back seat. Luis had been a taxi driver for years. He was used to the strange and unexpected, drunk passengers, late-night confessions, even an occasional person who swore they were being followed. But nothing compared to what happened one night on a deserted road outside of town. It was nearing 3 a.m., the city lights long behind him. He had just dropped off a passenger in a rural area and was making his way back when he saw it. A figure on the side of the road. Tall, motionless, facing away from him. At first, Luis thought it was just another hitchhiker, but something felt wrong. Its body was too still. The way it stood, unnatural, like a mannequin someone had placed there. Then, as he passed, the headlights illuminated its face, or what was left of it. Dry, shriveled skin clung to the skull, the mouth pulled into a permanent grin. Its eyes were black, sunken, voids of nothingness. The skin looked brittle, cracked like old leather left under the sun for too long. Luis's stomach turned. He didn't stop, didn't even think about stopping. He pressed down on the accelerator, gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The figure disappeared in the rear-view mirror. But the smell lingered, a dry, rotten scent like something long dead. And then a rustling sound from the back seat. His blood turned to ice. He had locked the doors. He knew he had locked the doors. Slowly, terrified, he adjusted the rear-view mirror, and his heart stopped. There in the back seat, the figure was sitting, grinning. Louis slammed the brakes, the car screeching to a halt. He turned around. The back seat was empty. His breath came in ragged gasps, his entire body shaking. He didn't drive back right away. Didn't move for a long time. Just sat there, gripping the wheel, trying to convince himself he had imagined it. But the smell remained. Thick, dry, rotten. The next morning, he found something in the back seat. A long, brittle piece of skin, like something had shed before vanishing. Louis quit driving taxis after that, and to this day, he refuses to look in the rearview mirror when driving alone at night, because he knows if he does, he might see it again. Story 3. The gas station encounter. Emilio had been working the night shift at a gas station for 3 years. He had seen it all. Drunk drivers barely able to keep their cars straight. Truckers half asleep at the wheel, and the occasional shady character looking for trouble. But none of them scared him like the man who came in one night. It was just after 2:30 a.m. The road outside was empty, stretching into miles of darkness. No cars had passed in nearly an hour, and the only sound was the buzzing of the fluorescent lights above. Then, the bell on the gas station door chimed. Emilio looked up from his phone, expecting to see another late-night traveler. But the man who entered was wrong. His skin was dry, almost papery, stretched too tightly over his bones. His lips were cracked, pulled into a permanent, unnatural grin. His eyes, sunk and hollow, seemed to absorb the dim light, making his face look even more skeletal. And the smell, it hit Emilio like a wave of rot and dust, like something long dead had been disturbed. The man didn't speak, didn't blink, just walked, slow and deliberate, toward the refrigerators at the back of the store. Emilio swallowed hard, his instinct screaming at him to leave, to run. But he forced himself to stay. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked, his voice coming out more unsteady than he wanted. The man stopped, turned his head slowly. Then he grinned wider. That was when Emilio noticed something even worse. The man wasn't breathing. His chest never rose, never fell. He just stood there, like a hollow shell pretending to be human. Then, without a word, he turned back to the refrigerators and opened one. A blast of cold air hit Emilio's face, and the lights flickered. For a split second, the entire store plunged into darkness. When the lights came back on, the man was gone. The door never chimed. The floor was empty, but the refrigerator door was still wide open. Inside, on the glass shelf, something lay motionless, a piece of brittle, yellowed skin, like something had shed before disappearing. Emilio quit the gas station 2 weeks later, and he still refuses to stop at any highway gas station after midnight, because now he knows some travelers don't need fuel. They're just looking for something else. Story 4, The Last Ride. Manuel had been driving buses for over 2 decades. He had taken passengers through long, empty highways, winding mountain roads, and deserted rural areas. He thought he had seen everything. Until one night, during Lent, when he picked up a passenger he would never forget. It was a quiet route, just a handful of people left on board. The last stop was still 30 minutes away, and the road ahead was nothing but darkness stretching endlessly under his headlights. Then, a figure on the roadside, thin, motionless, standing just beyond the reach of his high beams. At first, Manuel thought it was just another late-night traveler needing a ride. Against his better judgment, he slowed the bus, stopping just a few feet away. The figure didn't move. Then, without ever stepping forward, it was suddenly at the door. Manuel's stomach twisted. The man, or whatever was unnaturally thin, his skin dry and stretched tight, like old leather left in the sun for too long. His hollow eyes bore into Manuel's, dark voids where there should have been life. And that grin, a wide, cracked smile, too large for his face. Manuel's fingers trembled over the door controls. His instincts screamed at him not to open it, but the thing outside tilted its head, as if it knew what he was thinking, as if it had heard it. Then, slowly, deliberately, it raised a single skeletal finger and pointed at the door. Manuel's body moved on its own. He didn't remember pressing the button, didn't remember making the decision, but the door hissed open. The figure stepped inside. The air turned heavy. The other passengers sat in silence, staring straight ahead, as if they couldn't see what had just entered. Manuel gripped the wheel, forcing himself to move. He needed to drive. He needed to get to the last stop and get rid of this thing. The bus lurched forward. In the rear-view mirror, the figure didn't take a seat. It stood in the aisle, still, unmoving, grinning. The road stretched on forever, the hum of the engine the only sound. Then, the lights inside the bus flickered. The mirror showed the passengers sitting motionless, except for one, the last row, where the figure had been standing. It was empty. Manuel's throat tightened. His grip on the wheel turned painful. Then, a breath, not his own, right next to his ear. "This is my stop." The bus slammed to a sudden halt. The door hissed open on its own. Manuel didn't turn around, didn't dare to look. But as he stared at the empty road ahead, his knuckles white against the wheel, he saw something move in the mirror. A dry, withered hand reaching up from beneath the last row of seats and pulling something down. The door slammed shut. The bus remained silent. The next time Manuel checked the last row, a single, brittle piece of skin lay on the seat, like something had shed before leaving. He never drove that route again. And to this day, late at night, when he parks his car in the driveway, he never checks the back seat, because some passengers never really leave.